Hello everyone, it's Salas and Bolts trying to create some resemblance of a YouTube channel. For those of you that don't know, I'm studying translation at college in Japan in an international school. One of the things that's really cool about international school is that everyone here is bilingual, so it's a great environment for translators to study. In other schools, you only have one cultural lens to view things through. The teacher might be the only person with experience abroad, etc. But here, each student has something to contribute from a different part of the world. Because of that, the translations we do are really interesting. The PowerPoint I'm about to show you is for a class called Translation at Work. Instead of having a textbook, our teacher gave us a topic each class, didn't say anything more than that, and we looked up a bunch of stuff on the internet and made PowerPoints and presented them. For our final project, we got access to everyone's PowerPoints from the whole semester, and made our own giant PowerPoint with everything we learned from the class. So that's what this is. And of course, you know I had to put Boruto-themed things on every slide. It's educational, at least don't copyright claim me, YouTube. I created this with Boruto fans in mind, but it's for anime fans, language learners, and translators of all types. It's going to explain some things that will help everyone understand what goes into translation, why it's such a hard job, and why reading something that's translated is different from reading what's actually written. So first we're going to start with the famed machine translation. A lot of you might know about ChatGPT and Google Translate and DeepL as machine translation, but I bet you didn't know how they work. It's not too interesting for most people. But don't worry, I tabbed out the video so you can just skip to the section that interests you. And later, I'll be going over how you can actually use translation tools to help you learn a language. They're not all bad, and some of them can really help you, but just like any tool, it's important to know how to use them. Real quick, I'm just going to give a general overview of the background behind how translation tools evolved to be what they are today. It's important to understand how they work so you can recognize where machine translators fall short and understand when it's a good idea to use them and when it's not. There are three basic types: rule-based machine translation, statistical machine translation, and neural machine translation. Way back in the day when machine translation was first conceptualized, it was all done by hard-coding rules and using a dictionary. By rules, I mean all that stuff that you learned and probably forgot about in elementary school and don't even think about anymore. Subject-verb agreement, what is a complete sentence, where does a comma go, when do you use a question mark? Way more complicated than that, but you get the gist. I used Amado for this page because he's the scientist that made the cyborgs, the creator. To be the creator, you have to have a really good understanding of how something works. It's the same for the people that made these lists of rules for translation back in the day. But using lists like this is a big problem for languages like Japanese and English, or really most Western and Eastern languages, where the sentence order isn't the same. You might notice on that little chart there it goes subject, object, verb in Japanese, and English is subject, verb, object. That means in Japanese the order of the sentence is I pen have. Watashi wa pen ga arimasu. So if you just translate one word at a time and put them all together, the sentence is going to be scrambled. Word one for one translate if you sentence scrambled will be. The longer the sentence is, the more complex. And of course, there are differences in how to naturally express a phrase, like a word for word being one for one, and all the particles not lining up with anything from English. Notice the orange letters in Japanese that don't have a matching color in English. And how there's no A before pen in English. It gets even more complicated when you think about the fact that words can mean more than just one thing, but we'll talk about that in the next example. Next, we have statistical machine translation, which didn't come around until about 2003. The way statistical machine translation works is it takes a corpus, or rather a database of words, and uses that to find the most probable translation. You have to have at least 2 million entries to make a statistical machine translation model. The problem with SMTs are the errors are pretty difficult to identify and fix. Before, everything was hard-coded, so if there was an error, you just went back into the code and said cat does not equal dog. I mean, that's really simplified, but I think it gets the point across. With this, you've got too much data to take into account. Google Translate used to be an SMT, but they upgraded in 2016 to the next model that we'll talk about, but that's why it kind of sucked before. If you look down at my example, you'll notice I used the word oishi. This is a pretty common word. Most of you anime watchers know it means delicious, especially if you watch any food-related anime. But there's tons of different ways to say delicious in English, and we don't often say delicious or tasty after eating food. To top it all off, oishi can mean appealing, desirable, convenient, favorable, and profitable. People say oishi shigoto, or job, in order to refer to a job that has a high-paying salary or a lot of benefits. A favorable, desirable job. But do you say, wow, this apple looks favorable, or wow, this job looks delicious? Probably not. You can also see if the sentence order in Japanese is backwards. It comes out backwards in English. The straight dictionary phrase would be, kono kare wa oishii, but because it's spoken Japanese and not written Japanese, the sentence is going to come out weird. The phrase in my example says, oishii yo kono kare, and the match is delicious, this curry. When people use machine translation, a lot of times it takes them a while to actually figure out how to type words into the translator so that they translate clean. But for people that can't read both languages, they have no idea that it's wrong. And while this example is really simple, you can see how this could be a problem with more complicated and longer sentences. Finally, in 2015, neural machine translation was created. Neural machine translation actually works a bit like a neural network in the brain. The explanation for this is really complicated, so I'm going to link another YouTube video that gets into all the coding and calculus behind it if you're interested. But basically, this type of machine translation is a lot better. You can even fine-tune NMTs for different styles of one language, like UK English and US English and Australian English. DeepL actually does the difference between UK and US English. It was also created in 2017, so it started off as an NMT. The reason I have Ada here is because of her clairvoyance ability. She's able to look into the past and see what people did, and potentially figure out how they might act in the future. Koji probably would have been a better choice. It's a stretch, but yeah, we'll go with that. Now I'm going to talk a bit about the strengths and weaknesses of the current NMT models. Because NMTs can translate thousands of words in an instant, it's beneficial to human translators to use machine translation as an aid. NMTs can give human translators an idea of how to structure longer sentences that can be difficult to break down, especially for languages where the sentence structure is completely different, like Japanese and English. They can also provide a rough outline for how long the translation will end up being. With current advancements in NMT technology, it's easy to directly copy and paste words that might be challenging for human translators into the internet for things like Reverso context or high native to see how other native speakers might have translated that specific thing. Being free to use is a strength and a weakness. Your privacy is not protected, so don't go putting classified company documents into Google Translate, but it also means anyone, even tourists, can use it to get around other countries. A lot of restaurants use NMTs to instantly translate menus, brochures, and other items for tourists to have an easier time navigating their country. And here are some of the weaknesses of NMTs. Context is everything when translating something. Most NMTs will translate Boruto's name to Bolt and Sarada's name to Salad unless they see mention to ninjas or Naruto, because that will clue them in that the name should be Boruto and Sarada instead. So quality actually depends on the language pair that you're translating. Some languages are closer in structure to others, so it's easier to translate them. French and Spanish give genders to different objects, Japanese and Korean have different levels of politeness, and English has none of the above. These kinds of differences make it so that grammar errors are often inevitable at times. Proper nouns like names will often be translated differently depending on what context the translator has to go off as well. We already threw out the example of Boruto and Sarada, but think of a store like Target. Without knowing the context of the name of the store, they'd likely translate the word Target directly instead of leaving the pronunciation as is. Because NMTs pull from a massive bank of millions of phrases that are learned with the help of AI through replicating a neural network, it's really difficult to revise mistakes in the code because it's hard to identify why a specific mistake is happening when other words are translated just fine. Overcoming those weaknesses. Following a writing guide for plain English is a great way to ensure your text is translated as accurately as possible. Using idioms and metaphors like hold your horses can confuse neural machine translators, but recently Google Translate's actually been doing a pretty good job of getting those correct. Either way, it's a better idea to ask ChatGPT to translate it because ChatGPT is actually pretty good at handling that kind of creative metaphorical stuff because, well, we'll get into why that is later. Anyway, after the text is done being translated, have a native speaker check it for parts that may seem unnatural. Checking the translated text afterwards can be really helpful even if you just swap the language back into your native language. So like if you're doing Japanese to English, you type the English sentence in, it gives you a Japanese translation, you hit switch language so the Japanese flops over to the other side, and then you can see in English what it's saying in Japanese. That's important because sometimes it takes the wrong definition of a word. For example, like a word like Target. If you were referring to a store and it took the literal definition, then you have the opportunity to try and reword your sentence again to fix it. So then you might ask, well, if machine translation is good and bad, then when should I use it? It should be used as a support role rather than the main mode of translation, because it does give you a basis to go by, so you're not rearranging all the sentences in your head. You can get the gist of a translation or what it's talking about really quickly and where it's going wrong. CAT tools can be a great way to ensure your translations are neat and consistent, especially when a group is working on a larger project. CAT tools can correct places that humans might make errors, like keeping proper noun translations consistent. So machine translation is kind of incorporated into a CAT tool, but a CAT tool is a lot more than just Google Translate. We'll get into that later. Anyway, machine translation is also really useful for quick translations to give you a general idea and understanding without having to be perfect. So Previously, publishing companies had to ask translators to summarize a book or give an opinion about it, but now machine translation can produce preliminary translation of a book for editors to read on their own. This allows the editor to generally understand the book before deciding to take it on as a project or hire a human translator. Now I'm going to talk about large language models, which this is what ChatGPT is. What is an LLM? So an LLM is powered by AI. It can generate text that makes it sound like a human and sometimes even talk to you. It works by analyzing massive sets of data like the internet archives. It's fine-tuned afterwards by a programmer to complete a specific task like helping someone find what they need on a website. Because it has internet archives to access, it will get context correct a lot of times. This is basically how different people use LLMs. Sentiment analysis is basically determining the author's attitude towards their chosen topic, whether it's positive, negative, or neutral. Apparently, LLMs can predict key features of DNA by deciphering DNA and RNA sequences, pinpointing genetic alterations, and anticipating their implications on protein behaviors. Businesses use chatbots to help you find what you're looking for. Casper is an example of a chatbot that talks with you and helps put you to sleep. LLMs can provide more precise and tailored speech results through cinematic search, looking at the meaning of the words you're searching for, focusing on context and intent instead of matching keywords. When I was translating Ikemoto's one-shot, there was this name of the bar. It's called Aku no Hana. And if you know anything about Aku no Hana, there's a Vocaloid song called Aku no Hana. There's an anime called Aku no Hana. It basically means like evil flower. But I wanted to know more about it, so I googled it and then I asked ChatGPT. And ChatGPT said that it translates to the flower of evil or the flower of sin. And in Cosmos, the name of the bar, Aku no Hana, carries an almost literary or philosophical weight because it's kind of alluding to this idea that experiences in life appear as attractive or captivating on the surface, but in reality they might have a corrupting or dangerous essence underneath. So it kind of mirrors the themes that were going on in Cosmos about the human condition and the nature of existence. And then it gave me all of the examples of Aku no Hana in like literature. So it was a French poetry collection by Charles Baudelaire. It's a metaphor for how like beauty and evil are intertwined, and how indulgence in one can lead to the other. And that collection of poetry had a huge influence on the symbolistic movement in literature, and the phrase Aku no Hana in Japanese has become somewhat of a literary reference to those ideas. So not only did it give me the history, it gave me the Vocaloid song, the manga and anime, it gave me all of this like background research, and it also helped me understand its significance in Cosmos. So LLMs can give you cultural context, cultural significance, and significance to specifically what you're working on. So they're really, really useful if you know how to use them. Here are some examples of LLMs. ChatGPT is most likely the famous and well-known one. Snapchat AI is less common, but it talks to you more like a human and less like a bot. It has a bit more of a personality. Gemini is a feature on the new Google Pixel. And chatbots like Casper and Olivia will simulate real conversations with people. And Siri, while having a lot of the same features, is not an LLM. It's a digital assistant that is hard-coded to respond to certain phrases. This is comparing LLMs and NMTs. In short, LLMs are better for things that require more human thought. Idioms, expressions, metaphors, the weather. They can do it all. They aren't just translators, they're extensive as the internet. An NMT is specific to translation and can only translate. It does not have access to the entire internet, so it cannot translate novels and manga as well as an LLM might be able to, but it can be programmed to function better for specific needs and can also translate into a wider variety of languages accurately. Now here are some problems with LLMs. So if the LLM has access to false information, it also may output false information in return. LLMs can make up fake information if they don't know the answer to something, and it will often not admit if it's unsure. LLMs also won't remember a previous conversation unless you prompt it to remember. Unless they have access to look up real-time information, LLMs only have the knowledge base from their most recent update. Because most LLMs are trained with the internet information, they may reflect the bias of certain articles in their answers. Some users also know how to prompt hack LLMs to make them generate harmful or inappropriate content by wording their entries in a certain way. So this is Alexis Kirsch and Mari Morimoto, the translators for Naruto. There's actually a whole page about Naruto translation decisions that I'll link in the description. But regardless of translation technology, the highest quality machine translations are always produced by customizing the machine translation for purpose and domain. Example, translating technical documents such as manuals from American English to Spanish. Humans are needed to produce fully accurate translations still. AI has not stolen away their job yet. Now I'm going to compare different translation software and see how it holds up to different jobs. First, we're going to start with a metaphor. Let's use this line from the game Naruto and Boruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections as a sample. It has the Japanese phrase "tedama ni toru," which roughly means to lead someone around by the nose. The official English translation says, "You're no match for me anymore," but if we break this phrase down, it has "ima no ore," which means like the current me, my current self. Nara adds if then, so if it's my current self then. Omae means you as well, or even you, so if it's my current self, then even you. And finally the phrase "tedama ni toreru ze," so if it's the current me, then I can even or also lead you around by the nose. The English translation uses a metaphor that means approximately the same thing. With this example, it's easy to see why translation is so difficult. Now let's see how machine translators hold up. Tedama is a word for beanbags or a cue ball, and toru is the verb to take. So let's see if any of those words show up, meaning the translator took the phrase literally instead of translating for meaning. Our first test is going to be with Google Translate. I'm just going to type it in. You can see what comes up as I'm typing, and we'll go from there. Ima no ore nara omae mo tedama ni toreru ze. Okay. We'll add the period just because sometimes it changes the meaning if you notice. As you can see, Google Translate says, "Now I can manipulate you too." Without the period, it says, "Now I can make you do it too," but it doesn't take the phrase literally. It's attempting. Now we're gonna do DeepL, so same thing. And it says, "This is why we don't use DeepL." I don't know why everyone likes this translator, genuinely. How should I explain this? So this tama here actually means balls. I'm just gonna switch it to UK English really quick and see if that helps at all. No? That just makes it more Boruto, like it's got the you know. I'm gonna try highlighting this phrase. Oh, no. Yeah, see? When you double click the word, it comes up with the right definition, but the translation is not correct. Alright. Now we're gonna move on to a translator called Reverso Context. You might not have heard of this one before, it's not as popular, but I'll kind of explain as I type and you can see what it does. Okay, so this one, instead of taking the balls, it's taking the hand. But this kanji right here means hand. But see, if you highlight hand, it gives you like this list of example sentences that have been translated by other people. So if I highlight the phrase "tedama ni toreru," hopefully something will come up. No? Okay, let's try getting rid of this. So the verb isn't conjugated. Nope. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so if you just put the phrase in by itself, this one isn't really a big sentence translator. It's more you want to use it for specific phrases. So it gives you all these sentence examples where it's used in Japanese, and sometimes the word that's highlighted is wrong. Like vampire is kiketsuki, but this was kind of useful. So since ChatGPT is an LLM, you want to treat it a little differently than a translator. If you're ever asking it to translate something and you give it the context and also ask about like the specific point that you want to know more about, it gives you a lot more helpful information. So let's put this in. Alright, here you go. So they're gonna break it down for you like I tried to do at the beginning. So ima no ore nara, if it's me now or with me now, referring to himself in the present, implying he's grown stronger or more capable. I don't know if there's anybody just listening to this, but if you are, I added a little note in the presentation because as I was listening to myself talk, I realized I forgot to include that nuance, and I think it's important. So I threw it back in there in text. And next you have omae mo, you too, or an informal way of saying you. They included the formality for me. Tedama ni toreru is can control you or play you like a pawn. The phrase tedama ni toreru figuratively means to manipulate, control, or easily dominate someone as if controlling a game or a piece. This is casual and somewhat assertive, ending also been used by men to emphasize something. There you go. You have the whole entire sentence broken down for you part by part. It's beautiful. Then you have the translation. If it's me now, I can even control you like a puppet, or if it's me now, I could have you beating out of my hand. The phrase highlights Boruto's confidence, likely after having improved his skills or growing stronger. He's saying that he's now capable of easily manipulating or defeating opponents. Feel free to join me in the next video about using NMT and LLMs to translate manga, and why this doesn't work.